You ever get the feeling that, like, when we talk about philosophy, it's, like, so abstract? You know what I mean? Like, it's so far removed from daily life. But what if we could, like, trace these big philosophical ideas back to something totally practical? Today, we're going to kind of try on our philosopher hats for a bit, and we're going to be looking at John Locke.
Okay.
You probably know him from like his political theories, right?
Right.
And the essay concerning human understanding.
Yeah.
That's a big one. But today we're going to be looking at him through a different lens, a surprising one even.
That's right. I mean, Locke's impact on how we think about government and knowledge is like undeniable.
Huge, yeah.
But today, we're on a mission. We're going to uncover a lesser-known chapter in his life, but one that was hugely influential. We're going to look at his work as a physician. Yeah, for about a decade, Locke was deep in the world of medicine. So we're going to look at how this hands-on experience, his collaborations with like leading scientists, and even his own medical writings shaped his philosophical outlook. It's a chance to see how like all these different fields of knowledge can be totally connected, you know?
It's true. Like we tend to compartmentalize, but it's all connected.
Yeah, and it's a new way to look at a major thinker like Locke.
To see him as more than just the political theory guy.
Yeah, exactly.
And for this deep dive, our main source is going to be excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on Locke on medicine.
Great.
Okay, so first things first. John Locke, champion of individual rights, the father of modern empiricism.
He was a practicing doctor, like really.
He was, yeah. It's
Mm.
something that gets overlooked a lot. But Locke was a trained and qualified physician. He spent something like 10 years studying, training, and even practicing medicine.
And this wasn't just a hobby for him. He was seriously into it. He took tons of notes, wrote a lot about medical subjects, though those writings didn't get published while he was alive.
That's so interesting. It really shows how deep he was into this. Not just theory, but actual practice. And you mentioned he worked with some big names, right?
Oh yeah, he was very important in getting Thomas Sydenham's Observation as Medicae published.
That was in 1676, right?
1676, yep.
Yeah?
This book was super innovative. It really shifted the focus in medicine to empirical observation, you know, like actually looking at stuff.
Based on data and not just theory.
Exactly. And Locke worked really closely with Sydenham for years before it got published.
And Sydenham is like a big deal in medicine, right? I remember, like from my history of medicine class, that he was considered the father of English clinical medicine.
You got it. That's him. And he was a big believer in empiricism. So he was all about moving away from all that theoretical speculation and focusing on actually observing how diseases worked and whether treatments were effective. Like, does it work or not?
Super practical.
Super practical.
Not just spinning these theories.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is the timing of all this.
Mm.
Locke started working on his big book, The Essay Concerning Human Understanding, around 1671. And that was right when he was working most closely with Sydenham.
Oh, wow.
So you can see how working with Sydenham really influenced Locke's thinking.
Mm.
And not just about medicine, but about philosophy too.
It makes you wonder if his medical work kind of gave him this foundation for empiricism that then shaped how he approached understanding the human mind.
It's definitely possible.
It's like these two projects were developing side by side, feeding into each other.
Totally.
Yeah.
And more scholars are starting to look at this connection between Locke's medical work and his philosophy.
Because for so long, it was just kind of ignored, right?
Yeah. But people like Kenneth Dewhurst, Patrick Romanell, Guy Meinel, J.C. Walmsley, Peter Anstey, they've all done some really important research.
Really showing that this wasn't just a hobby.
Yeah, and they've shown how close Locke and Sydenham were, both professionally and personally. And they've traced how Locke's ideas kind of evolved across both fields.
So it's more than a footnote in a biography. This medical work, it seems like it's key to understanding Locke.
Exactly. I mean, our source calls it a key to understanding the deep structure of Locke's views on how we know things and the nature of reality.
So we're talking about his epistemology and his metaphysics,
Right.
and these were shaped by his work in medicine.
It seems that way, yeah.
Okay, so let's back up even further. What got Locke interested in medicine in the first place? Like, back when he was at Oxford?
Well, it seems like he wasn't all that impressed with the usual Oxford curriculum.
Really? The great John Locke?
Yeah, his friend Jean Leclerc said that Locke spent more time writing letters than he did on his actual studies.
Uh-huh. Sounds kind of familiar. I was not the most attentive student.
But luckily for Locke, his lifelong studentship at Christ Church gave him the freedom to study whatever he wanted. And he really got into medicine.
He was able to follow his intellectual passions. So what kind of medical ideas would he have been exposed to back then at Oxford?
Well, the dominant medical theory at the time was the Galenic system.
This was the ancient Greek stuff, right?
Yep. It went all the way back to Galen in ancient Rome, but was based on even older ideas from Hippocrates and others. It was all about the four elements.
Earth, air, fire, water.
You got it.
Hmm.
And then there were the four qualities: hot, cold, wet, dry. And of course, the four humors. These were the bodily fluids that they thought controlled everything.
Blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile.
Right. And they thought that to be healthy, you had to have all these things in balance.
So if you had too much of one humor, you'd get sick.
Exactly. And the treatments were all about restoring balance. Like if you had a fever, which they thought was caused by too much hotness, they might try to cool you down with certain foods or herbs.
Oh, wow. So Locke really delved into this.
Oh, yeah. He read all the major Galenic thinkers, guys like Glisson, Reverius, Fernel, Mobius.
I can't even imagine trying to wrap my head around all that.
It was a whole different system of thought.
But it's amazing how long those ideas persisted.
Oh, yeah, for centuries.
Uh-huh.
But our search mentions that Locke didn't just stick to Galen. He also read some less traditional medical thinkers, people who were challenging the status quo.
That's interesting.
Yeah, one of them was Daniel Sennert.
Tell me about him.
He was kind of a bridge between the old Galenic ideas and some of the newer scientific concepts. Like, he was still mostly Galenic, but he also brought in ideas from chemical experimentation and started talking about corpuscles.
Corpuscles, those are like tiny particles, right?
Yeah, basically the building blocks of matter.
So he was saying that even though these humors and stuff were important, they were ultimately made up of these tiny corpuscles.
Kind of. He believed that each corpuscle had both matter and form, like Aristotle said.
Okay, so there's a little bit of that classical philosophy mixed in with his newer ideas.
Exactly. It was a blend.
And Locke was paying attention to this.
Oh, yeah. Locke took tons of notes on Sennert's work. He even organized his own medical notebooks, in the same way that Sennert structured his big book, the Institutia Medicinae.
So even early on, Locke was drawn to these explanations that relied on tiny particles. You know, this kind of foreshadows his later interest in mechanical philosophy.
Totally.
It's like he's seeing the potential of these corpuscular theories.
Yeah, he was definitely open to new ideas.
Okay, so we have Sennert. He was kind of this bridge figure. What about this Anton Dusing guy? The source mentions him too.
Dusing was interesting. He was another one of those eclectic thinkers trying to mix and match ideas from different systems.
Sounds like my philosophy papers in college.
Haha, maybe. Anyway, Dusing was trying to combine the newer natural philosophy of guys like Boyle, Descartes, and Harvey with the more traditional medical framework.
So he was trying to reconcile the old with the new.
Right. He thought both experience and reason were important, but he often prioritized what the Bible and classical authorities like Aristotle and Avicenna had to say.
Okay, so not a complete revolutionary then.
Not really. But he was definitely trying to figure out how to fit these new discoveries into the existing system.
And Locke was reading him.
Yeah, Locke was all over Dusing's work. He even made his own indexes for a couple of his books. It's pretty clear that he was really studying this stuff closely. So Locke was really getting exposed to all these different approaches to medicine. He wasn't just stuck in one school of thought.
He was like a student of all these different systems.
Exactly.
But the source mentioned something called chemical medicine. Like, what is that?
Right? Chemical medicine. This was another big alternative to Galenic medicine.
Like a rival school of thought.
Totally. It was often associated with Paracelsus.
I vaguely remember him from History of Science. Wasn't he kind of a rebel?
Yeah, he was definitely not afraid to challenge the establishment.
So how did chemical medicine differ from the Galenic stuff?
Well, instead of focusing on balance, like Galen, the chemists were all about transformation.
Transformation, like metamorphosis.
Yeah, kind of. Like, think about how bread rises or grapes ferment into wine.
Those are chemical processes, right?
Right. And the chemists thought that similar processes were happening all the time in the body.
That's wild.
Yeah. They believed that these transformations, or fermentations as they called them, were key to understanding how the body worked.
So instead of balancing humors, they were thinking about chemical reactions and transformations happening all over the place.
Exactly.
That's such a huge shift in thinking.
Yeah. And they used lots of chemicals and minerals in their treatments. And they rejected all those scholastic ideas about matter and form.
Okay, so they were breaking away from a lot of the old philosophical traditions as well.
Yeah, they're kind of shaking things up in both medicine and philosophy.
Okay, so who were some of the big names in chemical medicine, the ones Locke would have studied?
Oh, there were a few.
Lay it on me.
Okay, so one of the most important was Thomas Willis. He held this prestigious position at Oxford, the Sedleyan Professorship of Natural Philosophy.
Natural philosophy, that was like the precursor to modern science.
Yeah, basically. And Locke went to his lectures, took detailed notes on everything.
Was he a big chemist then?
Yeah, Willis was a major figure in the chemical movement, and Locke was paying attention to all of this.
So what did Willis believe?
Well, he thought that all the stuff we see around us, all the macroscopic objects, were made up of tiny particles with different chemical properties. Like, he thought there were 5 basic types of particles: spirit, sulfur, salt, water, and earth.
So even though he was a chemist, he was also thinking about these tiny invisible particles.
Yeah, and he thought that these different particles had different effects on the body.
Like sulfur would have a different effect than salt.
Exactly. And then there was Joan Baptista van Helmont.
Oh yeah, another big name.
He was huge. Locke read his book, Ortus Medicinae, like over and over again, taking notes all the time.
Van Helmont was a really influential figure in chemical medicine.
Oh, yeah. So what did Locke pick up from him? Well, van Helmont believed that all matter ultimately came from water.
Water, like the stuff we drink.
That's right. And he thought that water was transformed into different chemical elements by these things called ferments.
Ferments. So we're back to that concept of transformation.
Yeah. Van Helmont thought these ferments were kind of like tiny seeds.
Seeds?
Yeah, each one carried a specific seed that would transform the water into a particular element or substance.
So like a seed for gold, a seed for iron, a seed for salt.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see why they called it chemical medicine. It was all about these chemical transformations.
And get this, Van Helmont thought that these transformations were guided by these things he called archae.
Archae. What are those?
Yeah, they're like these quasi-spiritual entities that control the ferments.
Almost like a life force or something.
Yeah, kind of. They were a bit mysterious, even to Van Helmont himself.
So Locke was soaking up all this stuff about chemical transformations and these almost like vitalistic explanations for how the body worked.
He was, yeah. And it wasn't all just book learning either.
Oh, tell me more.
Well, Locke also took a practical course in chemistry at Oxford. It was taught by Peter Stahl, who was the first to teach chemistry publicly there.
Wow, so Locke was getting hands-on experience with this stuff.
He was. Now, there's this guy, Anthony Wood, who wrote about Locke being kind of a troublemaker in these classes.
Really?
But Locke's own notes from that time show that he was really interested in the subject. And he even kept doing his own chemical experiments in Oxford for years after that.
So even though there's a story about him maybe not being the best student, he was clearly engaged with this.
Definitely. And this practical experience with chemistry probably had a big influence on his early medical thinking as well.
Okay, so we have Galenic medicine, chemical medicine, and then there's the rise of mechanical philosophy. Was Locke paying attention to that too?
Oh, yeah. He was a serious student of mechanical philosophy.
This is the idea that everything could be explained in terms of matter and motion, right?
Exactly. No mysterious forces or vital principles, just the laws of physics.
So how did Locke engage with this?
Well, he was reading Robert Boyle, starting around 1660, and he followed Boyle's work really closely as it was published. He read about Boyle's experiments with air, his ideas about physiology, his investigations into the origins of forms and qualities, all sorts of stuff.
Boyle was a huge figure in the scientific revolution, one of the pioneers of the experimental method.
Totally. And Locke was right there with him, absorbing it all.
And Descartes. Locke read him too, right?
Absolutely. Between 1660 and 1662, Locke did a deep dive into Descartes. He read the Principles of Philosophy, the Discourse on Method, the Meditations, pretty much everything Descartes wrote.
Locke wasn't messing around.
Nope. And he even read Gassendi and Spinoza, who were both interpreting and critiquing Descartes in their own way.
So he was getting all sides of the story.
Yeah, he was trying to figure out for himself what made sense. And what's really interesting is that Locke's notes on mechanical philosophy, they often focused on stuff that would be relevant to a doctor. Like, he thought a lot about the vacuum and the properties of motion, probably because he was thinking about how these ideas could apply to physiology.
So he was taking these big philosophical ideas and applying them to the body.
Exactly. So by the mid-1660s, Locke was deeply immersed in all these different theories: Galenic, chemical, mechanical, and he was really engaging with the big debates of the time.
He was right at the center of this intellectual ferment, trying to synthesize all these different approaches.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got Locke at Oxford absorbing all this knowledge. What's next? When does he start to formulate his own views?
Well, in 1664, he started collaborating with Richard Lower.
Lower, he was another big name in 17th century medicine, right?
Yeah, he did a lot of pioneering work on the heart and blood circulation.
I think I remember reading about him. So what were they working on together?
They were trying to figure out the nature of blood and how respiration worked.
This was cutting edge stuff back then.
Oh, yeah, it was. One of the big questions they were grappling with was why venous blood, the blood in the veins, is dark red, while arterial blood, the blood in the arteries, is bright red.
That's a good question.
Right. The old Galenic theory said that veins and arteries were separate systems, and that air was mainly there to cool the heart.
But that's wrong. Right.
Yeah, it is. Harvey's discovery of blood circulation blew that theory out of the water.
The blood's all going around in a loop.
Exactly. So then people started asking new questions like,
Ugh.
what does air actually do? What's the heart's role? What about the lungs?
And Locke jumped right into this debate.
He did. He took tons of notes on respiration, volatility, fermentation, all that stuff. And he was really drawing on Lower's experiments for a lot of his ideas.
So it was this combination of theoretical thinking and actual experimental data,
Right.
like a true scientist.
And he even started speculating about this nitrous salt. Well, he thought there might be this specific chemical component in the air, some kind of nitrous salt, that was responsible for making the blood turn red and also for volatilizing it.
Volatilizing it.
Well,
What does that mean?
It basically means making it more active, more spirituous, like giving it more life force.
Oh, wow. So he's still drawing on these chemical ideas.
He is, yeah. And he even proposed an experiment to see if venous blood and arterial blood had different amounts of this nitrous salt.
So he's not just theorizing, he's thinking about how to test these ideas.
Exactly. And all of this led to him writing a paper in 1666 called Respirationis Usus.
In which he basically said, forget Galen, I've got a new theory.
Haha, pretty much. He challenged the idea that breathing was mainly about cooling the blood. Instead, he argued that the main purpose of respiration was to volatilize and cause the ascension of animal spirits in the blood.
Animal spirits, what are those?
They were these subtle fluids that people back then thought were responsible for sensation and movement. They were kind of like the nervous system, but more ethereal.
So Locke was saying that breathing was all about energizing these animal spirits.
Exactly. And he pointed out that air was needed for fermentation and volatilization, which were these key chemical processes.
So he's using chemical theory to explain a physiological process.
Yeah, he was trying to synthesize ideas from different systems, and he even identified what he thought was the active agent in the air that caused all of this.
The key ingredient.
Right, he thought it was this highly volatile nitrous nature in the air, something like saltpeter.
Okay, so he's got this whole theory now. What happened next?
Well, in 1667, there was this experiment by a guy named Fracassati.
Another scientist doing cool stuff.
Yep. And it was published in the Philosophical Transactions, which was like the big scientific journal of the day. So this experiment showed that even cold blood would turn red when exposed to air.
So it wasn't the heat that was causing the change?
Right. It meant that the air itself was directly volatilizing the blood.
Okay, so this was a big discovery. How did it impact Locke's thinking?
It made him realize that the volatilization of the blood was happening in the lungs, directly through contact with the air, not primarily in the heart, like it initially thought.
So he had to revise his theory.
Yeah. But this new insight let him really nail down how respiration worked. And this was even before Richard Lower published his famous book on the heart, the Tractatus de Corde.
So Locke was ahead of the curve on this.
He was. And if he had published his ideas, he might be remembered as one of the founders of modern physiology.
That's pretty crazy to think about. He was right on the edge of this major discovery.
Yeah, and it's really interesting how he was still using chemical theory in all of this. Like Robert Boyle, who was a big proponent of mechanical philosophy, he thought it was unlikely that you needed some vital quintessence in the air for life.
Some special ingredient.
Right. But Locke was sticking with that chemical idea. He was still really influenced by Helmont's ideas about volatility and fermentation, even though Boyle was pushing this more mechanical explanation.
So even though he was reading Boyle and Descartes, Locke still had his own distinct perspective.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we see Locke really getting into physiological research, asking big questions, challenging existing theories. But what about his understanding of disease? Like, what did he think caused people to get sick?
Well, he wrote this short piece in 1666 called Morbus. And in that, he explicitly said he was going with a Helmontian ontology.
Ontology, that's like a theory of being, right? Like what exists and how it exists.
You got it. So Locke's saying that his basic view of reality is aligned with Van Helmont's chemical philosophy.
That's really interesting. So how did this play out in his theory of disease?
It was a bit of a mix. He said he wanted to get past all the arguments between the Galenists and the Paracelsians, which were another group of chemists.
So he was trying to find a middle ground.
In a way.
Mm-hmm.
But his theory still relied heavily on these Helmontian seminal principles. These were basically like ferments that cause disease.
Okay, so he's still thinking in terms of these active agents that transform matter?
Yeah, it's very chemical. And he even talked about the archaeus again, that mysterious force that Van Helmont believed controlled the ferments.
So he's bringing in these almost vitalistic ideas.
He is, but he also admits that he doesn't really understand how the archaeus works. It's kind of a mystery to him.
That's fair enough. So how did these seminal principles actually cause disease, according to Locke?
He used this analogy of seeds. Like, you plant different seeds in the same soil, and you get different plants, right?
That's a good analogy.
Yeah, and he was using this to argue against the mechanical explanations of disease that guys like Descartes and Boyle were putting forward.
So instead of seeing disease as like a clockwork mechanism breaking down, he's thinking about it as these active principles, these seeds transforming the body in different ways.
Exactly.
That's a very different way of looking at things.
Yeah, it is. And Locke even referenced one of Boyle's experiments from The Skeptical Chemist.
Boyle's famous book where he argues against the chemists.
Right. But Locke used Boyle's experiment about growing mint and marjoram in water to support a Helmontian perspective.
So he's taking Boyle's work and using it to argue against Boyle's own conclusions.
Exactly. He was really trying to develop his own independent perspective. But he wasn't completely rejecting Galen either.
The humors were still in the picture.
Kind of. He thought that the humors didn't directly cause disease, but they could make you more or less susceptible to these seminal principles.
So the humors were like a predisposing factor.
Yeah, like if you had a certain imbalance in your humors, you might be more likely to get sick from a particular ferment.
Okay, that's starting to sound like a more complex and nuanced theory of disease.
It is, yeah. He's trying to bring together ideas from different traditions. And he also talked about non-seminal diseases.
Diseases that weren't caused by these seminal principles.
Right. He thought these were caused by a bare mixture of parts.
What does that mean?
It basically means that the different components of the body get mixed up in the wrong way.
Okay, so instead of being transformed by a ferment, they're just not interacting properly.
Right. And he gave the example of acid and volatile salts reacting to create a new substance. But even here, he was interpreting this through a chemical lens, not a mechanical one.
So even when it comes to these basic chemical reactions, he's still thinking about transformation, not just mechanical interaction.
Yeah, he was really committed to the chemical philosophy. So even though he was reading and learning from the mechanical philosophers, at this stage in his life, he was definitely more of a chemist himself.
He had his own intellectual agenda, which was distinct from Boyle's and Descartes'.
Absolutely.
This is so interesting. It really changes how I think about Locke's development as a thinker.
I know, it's really eye-opening.
So what caused him to shift away from this, or at least to broaden his perspective beyond this chemical focus? When does Sydenham come back into the picture?
Right around now, actually. In 1667, Locke moved to London, and that's when he met and started working closely with Thomas Sydenham.
The father of English clinical medicine?
That's the one. And Sydenham was all about empiricism in medicine. He really pushed for observing specific diseases and seeing which treatments actually worked without getting bogged down in speculations about what was causing them on some deep level.
So he was a pragmatist.
Totally. He thought that a lot of the ultimate causes of diseases were beyond what humans could understand, at least back then.
Because we didn't have the tools to really see what was happening at the microscopic level.
Right, and he believed that nature was pretty regular in how diseases manifested.
So you could learn a lot by just observing carefully.
Exactly. His book, Methodus Curandi Febris, was all about identifying different types of fevers and figuring out the best ways to treat them. And it was all based on empirical observation.
Like trial and error, what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, it was a very practical approach.
Yeah.
So how did Locke react to all of this? I mean, he'd been deep into all these different medical theories, and here comes Sydenham saying, forget the theories, let's just see what works.
So was Locke on board.
Oh yeah, he was completely blown away by Sydenham. There's this story from James Tyrrell who said that Locke basically worshipped Sydenham.
Like he was starstruck?
Kind of. He thought Sydenham was a genius, way better than other doctors like...
God Lower, his former collaborator.
I know, right? It's wild. But that just shows how much Sydenham influenced him.
And Locke's own work started to change.
Oh yeah, he went from being more of a scholar, studying all these texts, to being more like Sydenham's apprentice.
Like following him around, taking notes?
Exactly. He started going with Sydenham on his rounds, carefully observing patients, and really getting into this whole empirical approach.
So it was like he was relearning medicine.
In a way, yeah. And then in the 1668, the second edition of Sydenham's Methodist came out, and this edition really doubled down on the practical side of things.
Even more focus on healing, less on theory.
Right. And Sydenham was a big believer in observation, even for controversial treatments like bloodletting for the plague.
Which is interesting because bloodletting is not something we do anymore.
No, not really, but back then it was standard practice. And Locke was totally on board with this whole approach.
He was a convert.
Totally. And you know what's really cool? In that second edition of the Methodist, there's a poem praising Sydenham, and it's signed JLOCK Eid Christioxen.
Locke wrote a poem.
He did. And in the poem, he directly says that Sydenham's skill and success as a doctor came from his empirical methods. He's basically saying that Sydenham figured out how to treat even the plague by carefully observing and figuring out what worked.
Which was a huge deal back then. The plague was terrifying.
Yeah, it was. And Locke contrasts Sydenham with all these other doctors who were stuck in endless theoretical debates.
Who were more interested in being right than in actually healing people.
Exactly. And it's pretty likely that Locke also helped Sydenham with some of the references in the book, the ones supporting his recommendations for treating the plague.
So he wasn't just a fanboy, he was an active collaborator.
Yeah, they were really working together as intellectual partners. And their collaboration didn't end there. Locke was really involved in Sydenham's later work, too.
What else did they do together?
Well, Locke helped write the dedication and preface for a book. Sydenham was planning on smallpox.
Another big killer back then.
Yeah. And Locke also wrote his own medical essays. Like in 1668, he wrote Anatomia.
Oh, just in title.
And then in 1669, he wrote De Arte Medica.
Which means On the Art of Medicine.
Right. And both of these essays were all about defending Sydenham's methods.
So he was putting his own philosophical skills to work in the service of Sydenham's medical project.
Yeah. And on top of all that, Locke was super involved in putting together Sydenham's medical observations manuscript. This was a big project that went on from 1667 to 1674.
So those were like his collected notes and observations.
Basically. And Locke actually wrote out 10 of the essays in the manuscript himself.
Wow, 10 essays. That's a huge contribution.
Yeah, it is. And he corrected all of Sydenham's writing, made copies of the manuscript, the whole 9 yards.
It sounds like he was basically Sydenham's editor and research assistant all rolled into one.
Pretty much, yeah. And this manuscript, along with the Methodists, became the basis for Sydenham's big book, The Observationes Medicae, which was published in 1676.
The one we talked about at the beginning.
Yeah. And in the preface, Sydenham specifically thanks Locke for all his help.
So their working relationship lasted for years.
It did. From 1667 to 1671, they were super tight. Locke was like Sydenham's right-hand man, helping him develop and refine his ideas and get them out into the world.
And this was all happening right around the same time that Locke was starting to work on the essay.
Exactly. It's all connected.
Okay, so let's talk about how all this work with Sydenham changed Locke's own views on medicine. Like, how did it shift his thinking?
Well, before he met Sydenham, Locke was more of an eclectic thinker, drawing on all these different medical theories. But after working with Sydenham, he really started to emphasize the importance of observation and experience.
Like seeing what actually works in practice?
Exactly. And this is really clear in his essays Anatomia and De Arte Medica.
Which were written in 1668 and 1669, right?
Right. In Anatomia, Locke argues that knowing a lot about anatomy isn't actually that useful for doctors.
So all that detailed study of the body, he's saying it's not that helpful.
Yeah, he's basically saying that it doesn't get to the root of what causes diseases. He says that the real causes are too subtle and fine for us to perceive with our senses.
So even with dissections and all that, we're still missing the big picture.
Right. He's saying that nature's working with these tiny little particles that we can't even see.
So even if we understand the structure of the body, we don't necessarily understand